Welcome, everyone, to Startup Winnipeg Innovation Alley podcast. We're here live from Innovation Alley with Chris Johnson and Dan Blair, your host chatting at you right now, Michael Legary. And we're going to do a bit of a roundtable today regarding, failure. Failure is something that we all have to deal with as entrepreneurs. And in startups, apparently it's all about failing fast and failing cheap. But, if you're going to fail, now what? So, just to kick the roundtable off, what are some of the mental struggles that a startup entrepreneur faces when deciding to shut down or move on from a startup or a project?
So I think the biggest struggle, of course, is that there's a lot of stigma towards failure. So, you're listening to podcasts like this one, or, you're watching any number of documentaries, you're out in the community, and it seems like everyone's a success, and it's, it's that one hit wonder every time. Everyone just, right out the gate, it's just huge. The biggest struggle, of course, is that, you don't want to show that you've failed. And a lot of people take it as like a personal attack against them that, if they admit failure, that, either them or their entire company is a failure. Just because an idea is a failure, doesn't mean that you yourself are a failure.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think they actually imprint their DNA almost onto their idea. It's like it becomes bonded. It's like a symbiotic relationship, and it has to be because these things are so freaking hard to grow from the ground up. A million things can go wrong, and you have to emphatically believe it's going to work. But Dan's right. When you know that something's about to go down, and you're starting to see those red cards, it's time to sit back and sort of start to prepare. So the red cards are those you can't find investors. You got too many other people doing it. You just can't get the traction. It's too expensive. Yeah. There's 100 different things. So one of the interesting points to talk about, I think, is you see those signs, right? You're driving down the highway, you start seeing all these signs come up, and now you got to bail. So, what do you do? I've been there myself, and I know what I did. And in fact, I actually failed at failing, I would say, and I now know how to fail better the next time because I think it might happen in the future.
Every time you fail, you learn a little bit better.
Yeah,
I think the number one thing to remember is not to blame your team. You can't turn around and just place blame on specific people for.
What if it's their
failing.
Fault?
What if it's their fault? I don't the thing is that it's a team, right?
Yeah.
So it's never one person's fault. You can't come after one specific member of the team and say, hey, it's your fault that we're failing. I think that's where a lot of people fail. They try to blame everyone but themselves for something that's happening.
So for context, I know it's funny when we talk between each other, and we've worked together in a number of different capacities over the last year now. For the sake of the audience, I think from a perspective here, we've all between the three of our organizations here, three entrepreneurs, we've been in for myself, small startups, large enterprise, government, back to mid-sized business, back to startups, and for me, I've gone through a number of failures in all of that. It's 20 seems like it feels like a 25-year overnight success. And what I found to always struggle with is those perceptions. You're worried about the perceptions others have of you. If you, as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to be an expert at this. Win every time.
You're supposed to have huge investments already and be in the news all the time, and your product is automatically successful.
Yeah, and I find that's tough to deal with because you at first you assume everyone you hear about in the media, all those mentors, those folks that you look up to are in the same phase. They always win, and there's a couple out there that seem to always win.
Yeah, there's always those people.
You put your years on, you realize that wait a minute, no, they've stuck with something, they've pivoted the heck out of it, and they've found something that worked. And if you look back 5, 10, 15 years ago, it's probably not what what they were doing then is not what they're doing now. What drove their success. They learned how to fail through it. But again, media focuses on the success, not their capability of handling the pivot, handling the failure. So I guess maybe a good question is what do you do when you see that failure? Chris, you asked that question. So when a project you're working on is going sideways, like what goes through your head? How do you evaluate whether or not you should pull the trigger.
Well, I can tell you with one that was, not so far away. It was only a couple of years ago. We built this really, really cool, ability to like control multiple screens and audio environments and things like that. And you know what? When the signs were sort of there that it just wasn't going to work, wasn't going to scale, there's way too much, whatever those signs were. Some of the ways that I think that you get afraid, like when do you spin down your accounting? When do you wind down your corp? When do you tell your customers? What's the order and sequence of all of that? It's easy to go and ask people, hey, I just closed a $1 million investment. Like, how do I hire people? People will tell you that. Hey, I'm about to blow up my company. What's the order of operations to like wind it down? That's harder to find. And you're right. It's the emotional support that's harder. But one of the things that I know that I did not do well enough, and I certainly regret and learned from, was I was too mortally embarrassed to communicate openly and transparently with our using customer base. Because one of the biggest things is when you go down, you probably aren't going down with no customers. You probably have people who took a chance on you early, who have been with you through some ridiculous growing pains, and even though you give them discounts and you're taking their money, you feel horrible. And I don't think there's any way to prepare for that other than to suffer through it. But I know that if ever in the future it's required, I'll be way more upfront with the customer base to make sure that they're understanding and that they're transitioned. So we did make sure they had some transition following, but sort of in a reactive fashion as opposed to proactive, and that wasn't too enjoyable.
So another thing to think about is that, sometimes projects fail, but it's not the core business of the startup. You have a startup, it's scaled a little bit, now you have a large project in the company, and that project is failing. The core business, like the company itself, is going to be fine, but say that another project is failing, then what happens, right? So I think it's important that you are not
you got to learn how to cut and run.
You got to be able to reassign people. You got to be able to see the signs early, and even if you've done all your research and you've done everything and you've expected that because your first success was successful, that your second will be successful, and it's not the end of the world. You are not ingrained in that product.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have customers yet or whatever, it's not the end of times. You take what you've learned and you carry on.
Yeah.
Whether you pivot with that product or you axe it and take it as a learning experience, eventually that has to happen, and that's okay.
Yeah. So. It's interesting. We're in some of the things I've tried to experience. I find one of the hardest things is again that psychological issue first. Why am I failing? Should I, that commitment to the customers that Chris talked about. And I agree with the perception. Running sideline or core business, you feel committed to it. You feel bound to it. You started it for a reason. You're passionate about it. That's why you put all this time into it. Especially if you've told
people about it.
Exactly. Especially if you told people about it. You've marketed it. There's a website, but. I do find that to the point around order of operations, it's scary because you sit there and especially early on, you would put more money, more time, like double down, and say, what, it probably, if we just wait another couple months, hopefully something will turn around. And you realize, as you've done that a few times and hopefully being able to bounce back from it, that's absolutely the worst thing is the moment you have that, well, wait a minute, let's just wait and see. And you haven't identified explicit actions and your explicit actions are not working. Like you're not measuring proactively managing performance. You're already, I'll call it following the failure, right? Instead of managing it and getting in front of it and making an active decision to kill it and to learn from it. Very quickly, you can slip into that slope of following the failure down. So it's I struggle with that a lot. Unfortunately, you look at this is obviously a topic you could spend a whole hour on. So I know from a listener point of view, there's a lot of other elements we're not hit on. But how about the lessons learned out of the failure? And what are some of the core things that regardless of how the failure occurs? What are some of the things you've taken away from failures and that other folks should focus on when they have a failure scenario?
Well, I think you should look to it's timely to look to the presidential election down in the States right now. We just had an election here. And you know what? You hear it all the time in the debates. So, Are you okay voting for a non-battle tested, tried and true commander in chief, right? Like, yes, they have to be diplomatic and deal with foreign relations and all these things, just like a CEO. You have to deal with 100 different things. But it always does come down to that. If you haven't served in the military and you haven't proven yourself on the battlefield, you're less likely to get the vote. And that's of investors, of people who are going to join you in your company, coworkers, strategic partners. So I think what you have to remember is that failing fast and cheap is the best way to fail, but failing isn't good at all, but it's better than not ever having tried, for sure. And I think that you just need to get yourself in a headspace where you realize, okay, I'm battle tested. So I'm going to not do that shit again at the very least.
So to be fair, it's interesting. Like I find you say it's not good to fail at all. Immediately a marriage kind of concept came into. You don't want to go into the marriage thinking you're going to divorce. Hopefully not.
Right? Yeah.
not without a prenup. At least.
Well, I've already got half my assets in a whole other bank account. Is that not the way you're supposed to go into these things?
I don't know. I'm getting married in July, so is that what I'm supposed to do, guys?
Good thing that you're listening to this podcast.
But so that's you better have done all that due diligence. You've committed to that one. You're not just saying if it fails, it fails. You're proactively managing it. How did you learn that? I just want to capture that. Like how did you what motivates you to make sure you're proactively managing it instead of just winging it and trying anything?
Well, it's a tough distinction because every day it sort of feels like you're winging it a little bit, to be honest. But I think that having good people around and a good board around you to help see the signs. One of the biggest problems is a lot of things that I still do day to day. It's my first rodeo. And so if I don't have smart people around me to help see the signs before I see them, I spend a lot of time being super anxious about the fact that I didn't see them. I'm embarrassed when I don't see them. I'm even further embarrassed that not only did I not see the sign because I haven't been through the rodeo maybe, I didn't know what to do about it. And I feel like double anxiety about that stuff, like all the time. And I think that probably lots of people feel that same way. And so, there's like all these micro failure points along the way, and you sort of live and learn and grow. But like when it comes to a total system-wide meltdown, like we are shutting this project down, everyone's hopes or dreams are dashed. Again, you're now battle tested. You've got scars. That's why battle scars are such a cool thing to have, just not when you're getting cut.
Yeah, you've lost someone's money.
Yeah, it takes time to come back from that a little bit, I think. And I think that's okay. And the more times you go through it, the more times you know you're going to heal. And if it doesn't kill you, it's supposed to make you stronger. So there it is.
There are certain things that you cannot possibly learn until you fail.
Yeah.
You can't know how successful you are with a product until you failed with a different one. Yeah. So whether that's working on a project that fails or, having one of your own, whether you're losing a ton of your money or someone else's money, everybody goes through failure. When you think of IT projects, there's an atrocious failure rate. Most IT projects do not succeed, just like most startups don't succeed. So I approach everything with the same mentality that I approach development with. I don't know everything. I'm always learning, and I don't want to know everything. I always want, there to be something else where I'm learning or growing in a different way. So, I've had several ideas fail. I founded BitSpace almost a year ago, and even just projects in the company, some have failed, and some have been successful, and that's great. But there are certain things that I wouldn't know how to deal with angry customers as much if I hadn't failed. You have to be able to deal with different situations, and sometimes it happens.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. I think it's you never want to fail, but you have to manage that failure proactive. There's the lessons out of that make you battle tested, that tried and true. You learn and appreciate it. I find the other interesting aspect. And I find if you can fail fast, fail cheap, and you build that discipline around doing it, when things become more material, like you're no longer the startup, you're 50 million, 100 million, $15 billion in revenue as a CEO, as a leader in that large scale organization, you understand the forces upon that organization much better, and you can understand how far you can push it before you cause damage to the corporation, to yourself. So, I find for me, I've seen several cases where having comfort with failure, having comfort with the discussion of failure, bankruptcy and managing that failure through, all of a sudden you get to a point where the next time it happens, you can make a decision for the organization and for yourself about how far you're going to put it to the edge before you are willing to accept those negative ramifications.
It's a balancing act, right?
Failing well and failing, I'll call appropriately, versus failing and burning bridges.
Yeah.
And if once you're in those trenches, that you get that ability, that discipline, right? So it's tons more to talk about this conversation. I think next time I want to bring a psychologist in here and talk about some of the deep side of that.
Yeah.
And maybe get into some of the actions.
I'll bring the Kleenex box.
We'll dig into our failures.
That's right.
And how we feel about them.
Well, thanks, guys. We'll wrap up here. We'll have more continuation discussion in the article and those elements. So thanks a lot, and we'll head on to our next module.